Not finished with me yet. Man, hope I can preach as good as they led that song. You're on fire today. He said that was pretty good. He knew. If you're not dead, God's not done. That's why you're here. Because you know that God's not done with you yet, right? Because if he was done with you, you wouldn't have to come. You're good. Check it off the list. But God's still working. So we're starting a brand new series today called Questions Jesus Asked. I'm excited about it. So one of the things that I do a lot when I start a series like this is I just Google a million things. And just so you know, I don't like Google like theology stuff. I have certain places I go to research that. It's not Google, okay? Just so you know. But when I'm looking at when I look at a sermon series, it's always what the Bible says and what God says, but there's also like the human condition that I'm trying to speak to. So I'm always Googling that, like what's going on there. So when it comes to questions, I was doing a lot of questions and answers and stuff like that. I was looking at a bunch of different stuff like that. And I landed on this website called answers.com. Have you ever been there? It has a little search bar at the top. You type a question and it gives you the answer, which I know you're like, that's Google. Well, I guess it's the same kind of thing, but it's specifically designed for you to be able to ask a question and then it just gives an answer back. So what I stumbled on it, I wanted to test it and see what kind of range of answers it would give. So I started, as a pastor should, with the question, who is Jesus, right? What else would I do? So here's what it said. It said, a Jewish rabbi who was believed to be the Son of God. And I was like, okay, pretty good. I'd probably argue the word was. There's about 1 billion people on the planet who think that. So to call it was is a little weird. But not bad. One sentence. So then I thought, okay, how about a science question? Why is the sky blue? And it gave basically a scientific paper on that. It was kind of weird. If you're interested, it has to do with the wavelength of the color blue and how it hits particles in the atmosphere and gets scattered back down. The other colors go right through. You should look it up. When your 3-year-old asks the question, you can go to answers.com. They have the answer. Then I wanted to see, okay, I did a Jesus question, a science question. What about, will the Browns win the Super Bowl? This is important. I didn't think it was going to have an answer. I thought, it would just come back nothing, but it did have an answer. And I'll just tell you exactly, it was 2 sentences. The first sentence was no, period. Then it said, they've never even made it to a Super Bowl. Which I was like, why you gotta be so snarky? Wait, that was aggressive. Probably not wrong, but. And then my favorite one, I thought, all right, we'll go something a little more I don't know, more of a concept. I typed in, what is love? What is love? Do you know what it said? Somebody knows. No. Baby, don't hurt me no more. That's what it said. I was like, it's crazy because I had already started to sing it in my head and then that was the answer. So answers. We love answers. We're kind of obsessed with answers sometimes. And we tend to think of Jesus as the guy with answers, right? That's how we tend to think. We even joke that Jesus is the answer to every question, right? I mean, it's a half joke, but honestly, if you look at the 4 questions it just asked, you could argue, who is Jesus? Well, Jesus is the answer to that one. Obviously, why is the sky blue? Because Jesus made it that way. Will the Browns win the Super Bowl? Only if Jesus helps them. What is love? Actually kind of works. Jesus is the answer. But did you know that in the New Testament, Jesus asks 307 questions? He asks 307. And he is asked 187, but get this, he only directly answers 3. 3 questions. Isn't that crazy? every other time he finds a way to answer it without directly answering it. So if you're keeping track, the ratio for Jesus is he answers one question to asking 100. That's the ratio, 100 to 1. So Jesus thinks questions are really important. And here's why. I think Jesus didn't like to just give people truth, I think he liked to lead them towards truth. There's something way more powerful about discovering truth than just having somebody tell it to you, right? It's way more powerful when you come to the conclusion on your own. So for example, when Jesus said the second greatest commandment to love our neighbors as ourselves, there was a man in the crowd who asked Jesus a clarifying question, who is my neighbor? Well, in response to that, Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan, which is one of the most famous parables on the planet. And then he ends the Good Samaritan and he asks the man a question, who was the neighbor in the story? So instead of giving the guy, he could have just said, everybody dummy, right? Like he could have just totally smacked the guy. Instead, he told a story and he asked a question. That's kind of how Jesus did things. He asked questions. He wanted to lead us to deeper truth. He wanted you to come to those conclusions on your own. So in this series, we're going to look at 5 of the 307, unless you guys want to go 300 weeks in a row of a sermon series. That'd be a couple of years long. So 5 questions, 5 weeks. Here's what I want to do today. I'm going to just give you the question first. Then I'm going to give you the context of the question. So rather than going through the story, I'm just going to jump right to the question because I don't want you to sometimes when it's in the middle of a story, you don't own the question. I just want to ask you directly. This question. It's a big question. It's an important question. It's a question that you need to allow Jesus to ask you. It's short, pointed, 4 words long. Here it is. Why did you doubt? Why did you doubt? That's a good one. Now, keep in mind, the best part of Jesus asking 307 questions is that Jesus knows the answer to all of them, right? Before he even asked them. So the reason for asking is obviously not because he's looking for information. He knew the answer to this question when he asked the person why they're doubting. He knew, but instead he asked. He didn't want to tell. He wanted the question to stick in the person's mind. He wanted the person to wrestle with the question. I think he still wants us to do that. Why did you doubt? Now, it doesn't say, did you doubt? It says, why did you doubt? There's a reason for that you'll see in the story, but it also highlights an important thing for us here. It wasn't a question if there was any doubt. It was why. Implied in there is that doubt is present in the person's heart. So I want to get something out of the way because I don't know what you did with this mentally. When I said, why did you doubt? I don't know how you responded in your mind. But if you grew up in church, there's a possibility I can guess. So my church experience growing up is that Christians treated doubt like it was cooties, like it was something that you definitely didn't want to catch or get, right? And we tended to treat people who had any kind of doubts, any kind of questions, like they had some kind of disease and we needed to quarantine them and keep them away from other people, because if they had questions, then maybe other people would have questions, and then all of a sudden everybody would have questions and it would be way too much. So we kind of treated doubt like it was a disease that you didn't want to catch. So I want to establish right off the rip here, there is no such thing as a Christian who has not, does not, will not struggle with, wrestle with, fight with doubt in their life on some level. No such thing. Any Christian who tells you the moment they become a Christian, they had no more questions, no more doubts, everything's been great since they became a Christian, man, I just would say I would not believe that person. I would not trust that person. Because either they're lying flat out or they don't know themselves very well. It is 100% a normal Christian experience to have doubts bubble up as you go through life. The reason I want to establish that, I guess I want to give you permission to answer the question, because I think a lot of times Christians have this tendency with the question, why did you doubt, to go, oh, not me. I don't have any. I'm sorry, Pastor. I told faith 100% all the time. I'm good, right? Like you want to deny it instead of answer it. I just want to give you permission to say that, hey, sometimes I doubt stuff. Not everything, pieces of it here and there. Sometimes I doubt. And just in case you don't believe me yet, lots of stories in the Bible. Actually, like every major hero of faith that we have had seasons and periods in their life where they had doubts. For example, John the Baptist. So let me just give you one. John the Baptist. You know who that is? He's the guy who came right before Jesus, and he had a ministry right before Jesus had a ministry, kind of preparing the way for Jesus. The reason he's called John the Baptizer is because he baptized people. It's just what they call him. So John, his first appearance in the Bible is when he's in his mother's womb. Crazy. Starts early. So he is in Elizabeth, his mom's, that's his mom. He's in her belly, and then Jesus is in Mary's belly still, right? So they're actually born pretty close to the same time. When they have their first meeting since they've been pregnant, so Mary walks up and says, hi, Elizabeth. The Bible says that in the womb, John leapt for joy inside of Elizabeth's stomach. Leapt. So that, and where did the biblical writer get that? Like, he had to have talked to Elizabeth. Like, so if you've been pregnant before, you know what that felt like, right? That was like a double rabbit kick to the bladder, right? She probably peed a little bit when it happened. Like, that was a thing, right? So she's like, she made it a little nicer. Like, he leapt for joy in my womb. No, he kicked you. He kicked you in the stomach. But think about that. That's crazy. So the Bible actually says that in some way, this preborn John, something inside of his little soul in there recognized something in Mary's stomach. That something of faith happened even before John was born. That's like next level, right? That's crazy. Okay, fast forward a little bit to when John has this ministry now, and he's preaching to people, telling them to repent and all this stuff. And he's baptizing people. One day he's down in a river and Jesus walks up. And you know what John says? John says, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So baby in the womb John and then adult John are kind of agreeing with each other, saying this guy is like the Son of God. There's something about this guy. He had faith. But then John gets arrested. John gets thrown in jail. John gets low. John goes to a dark place. And what happens while he's in jail? And I think it was an expectation that his life wasn't going to go this way. You know, he wanted this and he's down here now. So you know what he does? He gets one of his followers, visits him in jail, and he sends the follower to go ask Jesus a question. Hey, Jesus, Are you the one? Or are we waiting for somebody else, or are you the one? John asked that. Backflip in the womb, John asked that. Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, said, are you it? Because he had an experience that didn't quite match his expectation, and things happen, and his faith that was so strong, he had questions bubble up. So again, I'm trying to layer this on top of itself here just to give you permission to say, hey, sometimes I have questions. You should not answer the question, why did you doubt, with, oh Lord, never me. Unless you're better than John the Baptist. Are you better than You're not better than John the Baptist. Come on now. Again, you could just go down the line with all these huge biblical heroes. They had seasons where they had questions and they had doubts bubble up in their life. So again, I ask you, why did you doubt? There's lots of reasons, right? Maybe it's pain, maybe it's suffering in your life. That'll cause doubts to bubble up. You experience things that really hurt, especially for long periods of time. Maybe it's loss. hardly anything that'll make you experience some doubts in your life, like losing a loved one. Or maybe it's nothing so emotional. Maybe it's just some intellectual thing. Some college professor 20 years ago said something that's stuck in your mind and you can't seem to get around that. That causes doubt. Or maybe it's bigger than that. Maybe it's, the injustice in the whole world. You look around and you see war and disease and famine and all this stuff. And you go, man, it just caused me to question some things. Or maybe you're like John. Maybe it's the gap between the way you expected your life to go and the reality of your life. And you're looking at this gap going, this is causing doubt. Maybe it's some scientific concept that's got you tripped up. Maybe it's a biblical command that you see that you have a really hard time with. There's a lot of stuff in the Bible that's difficult. Maybe one of the things that causes doubt for you is church people. That's a common one. Just look straight ahead. Maybe they're sitting close to you. Church people cause doubt a lot. It's weird because, we follow Jesus, but you look at the followers of Jesus and you go, I don't know what to think about Jesus based off of his followers. Or maybe you don't have like a reason. Maybe you just have this nameless shadow lurking somewhere in the recesses of your mind that just like a cloud kind of hanging over your soul, and you just feel like you've got doubts. There are as many answers to this question as there are people who answer it, and I wish I could go down the line and deal with every single one of them. I actually tried. I took one of these and I started to answer it. I did answer it. I'm not going to lie. I actually deleted it in my office this morning. It was 500 words long, and it wasn't even very good. And I thought, if this one answer is 500 words, how in the world are you possibly going to be able to answer all these? It's not. That's called a book, not a sermon. I'm trying to avoid those. So you're welcome. There's a Browns game today. We want to get out of here at some point. But I can't answer each one. But I just want to say, think about the question though. Jesus, I'm not sure he was looking for a bullet point list. When he asked the question, why did you doubt? I don't know that he was actually looking for you to say, well, it's this and it's this and it's this. I don't know that that's the spirit of the question. So let's look at the context where Jesus actually asked this question, why did you doubt? He asked it to his disciple named Peter. If you grew up in church, you know all about Peter. Peter's the most, the outgoing disciple who usually speaks before he thinks. So he asked it to Peter, but it's not who he asked, it's where he asked the question that is most interesting. Jesus asked the question, why did you doubt, while standing on top of the Sea of Galilee. I said that right, believe it or not. I didn't say swimming in the Sea of Galilee. I didn't say standing in a boat in the Sea of Galilee, standing on top of the Sea of Galilee. So the story is that the disciples were going across the lake in a boat, and Jesus comes walking by them on the water, and the disciples are terrified. Rightfully so. By the way, isn't it weird? Like if you grew up in church like me, we read these stories like, why were they scared? And it's just Jesus. It's just Jesus doing Jesus things. Like, dude, a dude was walking on water. They were terrified. They thought it was like a ghost or something. Like that would be crazy. So Peter, being Peter, calls out, says, Jesus, if it's you, tell me to come out to you, which is a weird way to prove that you're Jesus, But that's what Peter picked, because like if it's not Jesus, this is going to go very poorly for him, right? So Jesus says, come on, let's go. And I don't know, just imagine that moment where Peter grabs a hold of the side of the boat and swings his leg over and then puts his foot down. There was a moment where his weight had to shift, right? Which was kind of putting himself out there. And then he starts to, I don't know what that would be like, man. Can you imagine what water would feel like holding your weight? But he's walking out there towards Jesus. We don't know how far. Isn't that weird about the biblical stories? You always have to use your imagination a little bit to fill in the gaps, because it doesn't say, hey, Jesus was exactly 50 yards away. We don't know. He was within yelling distance, right? They were hollering back and forth at each other, so it couldn't have been too far. But Peter starts walking. And then as the story goes, he's getting closer to Jesus. and the wind hits him and the waves start hitting him and he gets distracted and he takes his eyes off of Jesus and he starts to sink. And man, isn't that a perfect illustration of doubt? If you're a Christian, I feel like that's the perfect illustration of doubt, where you're taking steps by faith, trying to live that life that God wants you to live, and you got your eyes focused on Jesus for the most part, and then a wave hits you, or the wind starts blowing at you, and then you take your eyes off of Jesus, and that's when you start to sink. I feel like that's just a perfect example of what doubt feels like. Sinking when you're supposed to be walking. Now, we don't know exactly how it went down. It says that Peter started to sink. What is that? Quicksand? They sink slow. Don't you imagine it like this? I don't know. I've always imagined it slow. Could have just plopped in. And we don't exactly know how close Jesus was. Everybody always guesses at that. But it does say that Jesus immediately reached out his hand. So here's how I imagine it. And this is the most important part in the story. That Peter was walking, he gets hit by a wave, the wind kind of blows, he gets distracted, he starts to sink. It's Peter's instinct that is the most interesting part of this story. So we know based off the question that Jesus is going to ask him, it's doubt. He's sinking because of his doubts here. But you know what he does in that moment? In the moment of sinking into his doubts, in that moment, you know what he does? He yells out, "Lord, save me." In that moment, in the moment of doubt, in the moment where he is actually failing Jesus here, because Jesus was thinking, he's helping him do this thing. It's through God's power. It's through Jesus' power that he's able to do it. He's failing. And in that moment of doubt, that moment of failure, his instinct is to cry out to Jesus. And I just imagine that Jesus is, I don't know, like 10 feet away, and he just takes 2 big steps, and boom, he picks him up and pulls him right up and sets him back up on top of the water. And it's this moment where the question gets asked. And the full question is in Matthew 14:31. Jesus says, "You have so little faith. Why did you doubt?" You have so little faith. Why did you doubt? Now, again, your imagination is important. How you imagine this question, this statement and question being said changes everything about it. And if you grew up in church like I did, there's a demeanor with which Jesus said this that messes everything up. Because if like me, my feel growing up of this question was that it was a rebuke, that Jesus was a little angry at him, right? Like he had his finger out, like, "You have little faith. Why did you doubt?" And he's like angry about it. And if you think that about this story, then you also think it anytime you doubt that that's God's demeanor, that God is mad at you, God is frustrated with you, saying, "Well, you little faith, why do you doubt?" But listen, that's an assumption. It's an assumption that Jesus was angry in this moment. And I think a wrong one. Because imagine the story. In the context of the story, Peter's the only one who got out of the boat, right? So if Jesus is mad at Peter, he's got to be furious with the other 11, right? They're just, holding on to the mast, bobbing up and down. And Jesus is like, "You're good, but Peter, that doesn't make any sense." And Peter walked all the way almost to him. So my imagination is that Jesus comes up and he gets a hold of him. He pulls him up and Peter almost kind of falls into him a little bit. And I cannot help but imagine that they're smiling when this happens. That Jesus kind of laughs a little bit and Peter kind of laughs a little bit. And he's got a hold of him and he, with a smile on his face, says, "You have little faith." And then he stands him up, backs up one step and says, "Peter, why did you doubt?" It's not, "Peter, why did you doubt?" He's not rebuking him. He's calling Peter up. He's inviting Peter to a deeper faith. He's inviting Peter to see all that he's done in that moment. That's all he's doing. This isn't an angry thing. This is a good thing. He's not shaming Peter. Isn't it probably true then that that's the same way Jesus asks it to you? That it's not a rebuke, it's not some, that he's calling you up. He's inviting you into something. That when you have doubts, when you have questions, that he wants to invite you into something deeper in those things. And again, now that you've heard the whole story, you know there's no way Jesus backs up, holds his arms out and goes, "Why did you doubt, Peter? Look around, man. You're walking on water. This is awesome." There's no way that Jesus was going to wait and be like, "All right, tell me. So why'd you doubt?" And then Peter would be like, "Well, that wave, man, just hit me. The wind was really hard. The fish bit me on the toes. Weird. I didn't expect that." And it just started to sink. That's not what Jesus wanted in this moment, right? He was not looking for a list of reasons he doubted. Let me put it this way. There are people who experience the exact same thing, but some people, their faith increases in those things and gets stronger, even though they're hard things. And other people who something hard or something a painful thing, it causes their faith to get weaker or to crumble. Same thing. So the variable is not the thing that happened. The variable is the person and how they respond to that thing, right? So it's not that certain things will cause your faith to dwindle and certain things will grow your faith. No. For different people, different things the same thing can have a different effect on them. So what's the variable, Christian? What's the variable between a person whose faith grows in a difficult situation and a person whose faith gets weaker? All right, so to answer that, I have to back up and clarify something. Can you believe that I actually wore a sweatshirt first service? You should have seen me, it was horrible. I sweat through my sweatshirt. I know that's the name, but I don't think that's what they're for. I have to answer a question before I can answer this question, because I want to answer the question, what's the difference between a Christian whose faith gets stronger and a Christian whose faith gets weaker? I want to answer that. But I feel like there's another thing that bubbles up that I have to answer first. So I'm going to answer that one as quick as I can and then circle back and answer that. So before I answer what's the difference between a strong faith Christian and a weaker faith Christian, there's a reason Christians get squirrely about doubt, There's a reason we treat it like it's cooties. There's a reason that Christians in some churches, they try to shut it down. They don't want you to talk about your doubts. They don't want you to talk about any kind of fears or questions that you have. There's a reason. And the reason is because the essence of Christianity is faith, right? The very essence of it. Ephesians 2:8-9 says, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this not of yourselves is a gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." It is by grace through faith that you are saved. So if you were a little confused on that issue, what it means to be a Christian is to put your faith in Jesus and what he did on the cross. That's what it means to be a Christian. And then it very much clarifies, by the way, it's not by works or doing stuff. It's not being a good person. It's putting your faith in Jesus. These two verses very succinctly tell us that. Well, that makes doubts terrifying, right? If it's all about faith, then doubts are absolutely scary. Because for you then, here's my guess about you, especially if you're like me and you grew up in church, that you have moments where you do have questions and you have doubts come up and you have things kind of just bubble to the surface. It's what you ask about that. When you lay your head down on the pillow, you ask the question, "Ooh, what does this mean about me? Am I a Christian? Do Christians have doubts? What does this mean about my eternal destiny? Do I still get to go to heaven if I have doubts?" That's the thing. You don't, whatever you were doubting, whatever little thing came up, it immediately jumps to, what about my salvation now? That's a huge question. So let me pathetically attempt to answer this. There's a difference, Christian, between doubt and disbelief. You know that? There's a difference between doubt and disbelief. Doubt is questioning what you believe. Unbelief is a refusal to believe, right? Doubt is a struggle faced by someone who is a believer, but unbelief involves a determined resistance to belief. And the difference between those two is a choice. That's the difference. It's a choice. It's both people are going to have doubt, but one chooses to say, I'm not going to believe that. The other one says, I'm going to work through this. That's one of my favorite stories. I tell it as quick as I can. Is this father has a son who's sick, and the Bible even says he's like demon possessed. He has these convulsions. He gets thrown into a fire. The guy brings this boy to the disciples. The disciples try to heal him, and they can't. So the father, can you imagine being a father bringing a boy? You have nothing left. You bring it to these disciples who you've heard have this power, and they can't even heal him. And so he's frustrated. He's embarrassed. He's trying to protect his son, who they're praying over and having all this discussion over. And Jesus walks up into the midst of this with his disciples, and Jesus is like, what's going on? So the father explains the whole thing to him, and then the father ends with, I like asking, will you heal him if you can? And it's like this moment where Jesus kind of raises his eyebrow, if I can. All things are possible to those who believe. That's what Jesus says. But look at that question. Look at the question. He asks him to heal his son, but he says, if you can. If you pull this out and put it on the table here and say, what is that question made of? Is there faith in that question? He's asking, right? Is there doubt in that question? Oh yeah, there's some of that too. Now, if you're not allowed to have any doubts, shouldn't Jesus just say, good luck with that? Gotta have faith for me, buddy. But Jesus does it. And actually, the response is one of my favorite things when Jesus says, if I can, all things are possible to those who believe. The Father's answer is, I do believe. Help my unbelief. Help my unbelief. It's one of my favorite prayers in the Bible is, I do believe, help my unbelief. Now, according to our categorization, that wouldn't be unbelief. That's a doubt. He's saying, I believe, I want to believe, but I have this thing. I watched your disciples. They weren't able to do it. I'm having a hard time. He's been like this a long time, Jesus. I don't know. I want to believe. Help me believe. That's like the best stance you can possibly have. But the difference is a choice. Do you believe but struggle to believe sometimes, or do you have a settled resistance? That's different. That's different. Now, so it's a choice. I think the difference is a choice. What you do with your doubts, you choose. Because here's the thing. There's not a person on the planet who lives their life devoid of some kind of faith. Do you know that? Like, this is a really important thing. So if you're sitting here, maybe you're not a Christian yet, like a lot of times it's always framed as like, well, you're either a person of faith or you're like, you don't have faith. No, it's what you put your faith in, because nobody knows everything. And if there's unknowns, you have to choose what you believe about those things. And that is, by definition, faith, right? For example, you came in here and you sat on the chair that you're sitting on. You did not, I don't think, check the bolts before you did that, right? You trusted that whoever put that thing together did an okay job. And some of these chairs you shouldn't have, because I don't know what's going on with them. But nobody lives without faith. Nobody lives without faith. That's why I think it's a choice. It's a choice. What you choose to put your faith in. Now, maybe that's not enough. I know I have some overthinkers in here. So James actually gives a little more clarity. James chapter 2, we'll start in verse 14. Gotta hurry. What use is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone says he has faith but has no works? Can that faith save him? So James asked this question. He says, if someone has faith but they don't have works, so what he means is like they don't show it by their actions. They don't live out their faith, but they say they have faith. And then he asks the question that we all want to know, like, can that faith save them? He's asking the question, what kind of faith can actually like do the thing that it's supposed to do? He asks it. And then verse 15 He begins to answer it. If a brother or sister was without clothing in need of daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and be filled, yet you do not give them what is necessary for their body, what use is that? So he answers the question with a little bit of an illustration. Like, hey, if you're cold and you're hungry and somebody says, you're be good, it's good, you're all good, and doesn't help you, what did their words mean? It meant nothing. Verse 17, in the same way, faith also, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. But someone may well say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without the works, and I'll show you my faith by my works. Verse 19, if you believe that God is one, you do well. The demons also believe and shudder. But are you willing to acknowledge, you foolish person, that faith without works is useless? So here's what James is saying. Faith that saves you changes you. He said it meaner, but he just said faith that actually saves you changes you. What happened on the inside of you when you decided to put your faith and trust in Jesus is going to show on the outside in some way. There will be evidence outside of you of what's happening inside of you. Your faith won't stay inside. It can't. It'll take root in there. That's where it starts. But the branches and the leaves, they come out. They can't help but come out. That's how you can know. Is Jesus changing your life? Okay, he changed your heart. Is it changing your life? Fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. Some people think knowing the fruit of the Spirit is like the thing, but it's not, I promise. It's experiencing that. Do you have more love, more joy, more peace in your life? Is it changing you? And I know somebody's going to overthink this too. Well, how much change? It doesn't say. It doesn't say. How fast will it happen? Don't know. It'll be a 2 steps forward, 3 steps backward process, though. That's why you can't judge other people's faith journeys, by the way. You can never say somebody else, oh, they don't have faith, look at their life, because you don't know where they started, man. They could have started at 2 and they're at a 10 now. You started at 50 and you're at 51. Shut up. Faith that saves you changes you. And by the way, while this is kind of the answer to what kind of faith saves you, it's also the answer to how to respond to doubts better. I guess if you wanted to say, what's the difference between a strong Christian and a weak Christian? The strong Christian is the one who puts their faith into practice. And the weak Christian is the one who doesn't do that very much. Because actions, the way James said it, right? Faith without works is dead. Okay, but faith with works is very much alive. And the more these two things line up, the smaller the gap between what you believe and what you actually do, that's the stronger of a Christian you are. That's the stronger of a Christian you are. You want to have a strong faith, live it out. Do what Jesus says. Don't just believe that you're supposed to love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. Don't just believe that you're supposed to sacrificially serve your spouse. Sacrificially serve your spouse. Don't just believe that you're supposed to be generous. Be generous. That's the thing. That's what happened. What James is saying is that the more you know stuff or believe stuff and don't do it, that actually makes your faith weaker. And that it won't do what it's supposed to do in your life. And that's huge. That's a huge disconnect. Think of faith and works like 2 pedals on a bicycle. If you just have the one, how do you know? When you were a kid and you were trying to ride a bike, if you tried to ride with just one pedal, it didn't work very well, right? You kind of got down at the bottom, you're pressing and pulling, it just doesn't work. You need both. You need faith and works. You need to believe and live it out. Believe and live it out. And the more these two things go, the faster you can go, the stronger your faith is going to be. It's not just all up here. It's not just here. You got to live it out. Worship team, why don't you guys come up here? So I have 2 different challenges I want to leave you with. If you're not a Christian, you would say, I don't have doubts, I actually have disbelief. I'm refusing to step into that. I have a resistance to that. My pebble in your intellectual shoe is to just ask you, what is it that you're putting your faith in? It's not that you don't have faith in your life. You're believing something. You're choosing to believe something. Is it Is it going to hold up? And what's stopping you from choosing to believe that you're a sinner that needs a Savior and His name is Jesus? What's stopping you? Make a choice. And then if you are a Christian and you're maybe sitting here going, yeah, I've got doubts that bubble up every once in a while. And again, I'm not trying to deal with those individual doubts. I'm more trying to deal with the state of your faith overall when the doubts hit, because they're going to. So the question you really are asking is, how can I make my faith stronger? So let me challenge you with this, Christian. When's the last time you intentionally put yourself in a position where you had to trust God? Like you put yourself out there, you swung your leg over a boat and put it down on the water to see if it would actually hurt you. When's the last time you chose that? I know for some of you are like, I don't want to do that. That's terrifying. Yeah, that's what Peter did though. He put himself in a position where either Jesus did something or didn't do something that was going to very much affect him. So when's the last time you made a risky choice for the glory of God and watched Him work? Ask Him what that could be. Pray with me. Jesus, I pray for every single one of us in here, for when we have those moments of doubt, Lord, that we would be like Peter, and instead of running from you in that moment, being ashamed or embarrassed, that we would run to you, that we would cry out, save me, Lord, save me. That we would run to you, that we'd stop being embarrassed of these things, that we'd stop being embarrassed of the questions, that we would bring them to you, that we would wrestle with these things with you, not push away from you, Lord. Lord, and I pray for the person who's not a Christian sitting here. They have not decided to give their life to you yet, Lord. They haven't come to you in that way, Lord. I pray that they would, that their eyes would be open to you. Their soul would come awake to your love today, Lord. That they would make a choice to put their faith in you. In Jesus' name I pray.